The room was thick with a tense silence, broken only by the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Officer Daniels crouched down in front of the child, his voice steady but gentle. "Can you tell me what happened?" The girl, no older than 9, sat curled on the edge of the chair, her arms hugging her knees tightly to her chest. Her clothes were dirty, her face smudged with a mix of dirt and dried tears. She had been found wandering alone near the edge of town, barefoot and trembling, with no ID and no explanation. For the past 10 minutes, Daniels had been asking simple, careful questions. The other officers stood nearby, some pretending to busy themselves with paperwork, others exchanging quiet, uncertain glances. Everyone had the same question on their mind: what could have scared her this much? Daniels tried again. "It's okay, you're safe now. Can you tell me anything about where you came from?" The girl didn't look up. She stared down at the floor, her lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, it seemed as though she wouldn't answer. But then she did. 2 words. "That's all," she said. The officers froze. Daniel straightened, his expression shifting from concern to alarm. He stepped back, reaching for his radio. His voice was calm, but the urgency was unmistakable. "Dispatch, we need backup. Now." The room buzzed with sudden energy. Chairs scraped, and officers sprang into action. Questions flew: what did she say, what's going on? But Daniels didn't answer. He motioned for everyone to stay calm, but his eyes darted to the door as if expecting trouble any second. The girl remained seated, motionless, her eyes locked on the ground. Whatever she'd just revealed, it was enough to change everything. Just a few hours earlier, the girl had been spotted walking along a desolate stretch of road that wound through the hills. A farmer, on his way home from the fields, had seen her from a distance and slowed his truck. She seemed lost, her small figure illuminated in his headlights. But as he approached, the girl didn't wave or move closer. She just stood there, as if waiting. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" he'd called out, pulling over and cutting the engine. He hopped down from the truck, keeping his voice calm. "Do you need help?" The girl didn't answer right away. She looked over her shoulder, as though she'd been expecting someone to follow her. When she finally stepped into the truck's beam, the farmer noticed the mud caked on her bare feet, the scratches on her legs, and the pale, hollow look in her eyes. Something wasn't right. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get you somewhere safe." At the police station, they ran her description through the database, checked missing persons reports, and called nearby shelters. Nothing matched. No one had reported a child fitting her profile. It was as if she'd appeared out of nowhere. When they asked her name, she stayed silent. When they showed her photos of missing kids, she wouldn't even glance at them. It wasn't just that she wouldn't speak, it was how she sat, so still and watchful, as if she didn't trust the people trying to help her. The officers were growing increasingly uneasy. One even joked nervously, "It's like she knows something we don't." The comment hung in the air longer than it should have, leaving everyone feeling a little more on edge. They couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a lost child, it was something bigger. And then came those 2 words. Whatever she said sent a shiver through the room. It wasn't the words themselves, they weren't dramatic or threatening. But there was something about the way she said them, quiet, deliberate, as if she knew exactly what they meant and what would happen next. Daniels, who had been the calmest of the group, looked shaken. He barked orders to secure the perimeter and told everyone to stay alert. "What did she say?" one of the younger officers whispered. Daniels didn't reply. Instead, he took the girl by the hand, led her into a back room, and locked the door. The station, once a hub of quiet routine, was now buzzing with controlled chaos. Officers double-checked doors, phones rang off the hook, and backup units were on their way. The farmer who had brought her in stood in the corner, hat in hand, watching the commotion with growing unease. "What's going on?" he finally asked. "Is it something to do with the girl?" But no one answered him. No one even looked his way. All attention was on the child, whose 2 words had turned a quiet evening into a storm of activity. Something had changed, and the air in the room was electric with the feeling that whatever came next would be unlike anything they'd dealt with before. As the backup units settled outside the precinct, the investigation within the station took on an even more deliberate pace. The officers, still reeling from the weight of the child's 2 mysterious words, turned their focus to every detail that might illuminate her troubled past. The room, now subdued by a mix of urgency and cautious hope, became a crucible where each seemingly insignificant clue might unravel a deeper mystery. Officer Reynolds, a man known for his meticulous nature, gently reached for the small bundle of worn clothing that the girl had clutched. With careful hands, he began to examine the fabric for any sign of familiarity or anomaly. It wasn't long before his fingers brushed against something hard hidden in the inner pocket of her threadbare jacket. Drawing it out slowly, he revealed a small, intricately carved wooden charm. Its surface was smooth yet marked by delicate, almost cryptic symbols that hinted at a story far beyond the ordinary trinket. The charm's design was unusual, too refined for something a child would ordinarily possess, and it exuded an eerie sense of foreboding as if it had borne witness to secrets long buried. Officer Daniels leaned in to inspect the charm, his eyes narrowing in contemplation. "Have any of you seen something like this before?" he asked quietly, his voice a mixture of curiosity and concern. No immediate answer came, only a heavy silence that underscored the significance of the find. It was a token that belonged to a story untold, a remnant of a past that might be key to understanding the dangers now looming over the station. Reynolds carefully placed the charm into an evidence bag, his gloved hand trembling slightly as if aware that this simple object carried with it a heavy burden. But the mystery did not end there. As another officer methodically searched through the girl's belongings, a subtle detail caught his eye, a faint, irregular mark on her delicate wrist. The skin there was marred by what looked like a burn, not typical of an accidental injury from a child at play, but something far more deliberate. The edges of the wound were almost too clean, as if it had been inflicted with precision. Daniel stepped forward, examining the injury with a furrowed brow. It was a curious blend of tenderness and severity, a branding left behind by some force that had clearly intended to make a mark, both physically and metaphorically. A forensic specialist was summoned immediately. Under the stark light of the station's examination room, he scrutinized the wound, remarking softly, "This isn't like any common accident. It bears the mark of something deliberate, almost ceremonial in its precision." His tone was measured yet laced with unease, as if the injury was a silent testament to events too dangerous or too secretive to be spoken aloud. The specialist's observation deepened the collective sense of alarm among the officers. Here was a child marked by something that hinted at a dark and intricate history. In the midst of their inspection, a faint noise from the corridor caught everyone's attention, a hushed murmur, almost imperceptible, seeping through the slightly ajar door. The voices were low, laden with tension. One of the officers, straining to catch the words, overheard fragments that sent shivers down his spine. "We can't let her talk, the truth would ruin everything." The chilling snippet was brief, but its impact was immediate. The implication was clear: there were forces outside the station, shadowy and determined, willing to do anything to keep certain truths hidden, even if it meant silencing a child. Daniel's expression hardened as he processed the overheard words. The notion that powerful figures might be involved, and that they would resort to such extremes, amplified the gravity of the situation. The station's atmosphere shifted palpably, as if the very walls were closing in with unspoken threats. Every officer in the room felt the heavy weight of a secret too dangerous to fully grasp, a secret that was now intertwined with the fate of the child before them. Determined to piece together the fragments of a story that was rapidly evolving into something much larger than they had anticipated, Daniels called his team together. "We need to document everything," he instructed, his voice low and resolute. "This isn't just a case of a lost child. There's a message here, a warning, perhaps, or a plea for help hidden in plain sight. His eyes, once calm and methodical, now burned with an intensity born of urgent purpose. As each officer resumed their work, the girl sat quietly in the corner, her gaze fixed on an unseen horizon. Her silence was not just the absence of words, it was the weight of a story too immense for her small shoulders. Every detail, the mysterious charm in her pocket, the deliberate burn on her wrist, and the disquieting echoes of forbidden conversations, spoke of a past steeped in peril and secrets. In that moment, the station transformed from a mere building into a battleground for truth, with every discovered clue serving as both a beacon of hope and a harbinger of the dangers yet to come. In the flickering light of that cold, sterile room, the officers recognized that their investigation had moved far beyond the confines of routine duty. They were now custodians of a truth that had the potential to upend long-held certainties and expose dark undercurrents running deep in the shadows of their community. And as the girl remained silent, her mysterious bearing resonated with every unspoken question, urging them onward into the unknown. As the investigation pressed on, a charged hush settled over the precinct. The officers, still reeling from the unsettling clues discovered earlier, began to notice that every piece of evidence was part of a puzzle far larger than a single lost child story. Just as the tension seemed to reach its peak, an unexpected development sent another shiver down everyone's spine. It was just past midnight when Officer Daniels's radio crackled to life with a message that seemed to come from nowhere, a low, deliberate voice breaking through the static. "Follow the shadow where the lost find solace," the voice intoned, each word measured and laden with meaning. The message, mysterious and cryptic, hung in the air like a challenge. Daniels's eyes met those of his fellow officers, their shared glances a silent acknowledgement that this lead could be the key to unraveling the tangled web that now bound them all. The phrase echoed the resonance of the two words the girl had uttered earlier, a verbal cipher that had already spurred the station into a frenzy. Now, this anonymous tip appeared to connect with that initial spark, suggesting that there was a deliberate plan behind the events. Daniels quickly convened a small team in a quiet corner of the station. "This message," he said in a tone that balanced urgency with caution, "is not random. It's a clue, a hint that there's a hidden layer to what we're dealing with." He traced the words slowly, as if trying to absorb their full weight. "Follow the shadow where the lost find solace. We need to figure out what that means and where it leads." The team began to brainstorm. They scoured old case files, local legends, and even community rumors, trying to pin down a location or situation that fit the cryptic description. A veteran detective recalled whispered tales of an abandoned warehouse district on the outskirts of town, a place once teeming with life, now reduced to echoes and shadows. Others mentioned an old community center that had served as a refuge for those cast aside by society, a place where even lost souls might have found temporary solace. Every possibility was weighed, every theory debated. The wooden charm discovered in the girl's jacket suddenly took on a new significance. Daniels held it up, its intricate carvings catching the dim light. "Look at these symbols," he said softly, "they're not just decorative, they might be markers, codes for something deeper." His mind raced with the idea that the charm could be a token, a signpost left deliberately by someone trying to guide them. The officer's gaze shifted between the charm and the cryptic radio message. Both hinted at a world hidden in plain sight, a clandestine network where the vulnerable and the powerful intersected in dangerous ways. As the night deepened, so did the investigation. The team split up to canvass potential locations. Officer Reynolds, carrying the evidence bag containing the charm, joined a pair of colleagues to revisit the older parts of town where faded brick facades and neglected alleyways whispered secrets of a bygone era. With each step, the weight of the mystery pressed in around him. Every shadow seemed to conceal a hidden truth, every rustle of wind a potential clue. His mind replayed the strange voice on the radio and the desperate look in the orphan girl's eyes. Was she trying to tell them something beyond her frightened silence? Meanwhile, back at the precinct, Daniels pored over local records and maps. He cross-referenced addresses of former community centers, old shelters, and even defunct businesses rumored to be fronts for covert operations. The phrase, "where the lost find solace," began to take shape as a possibility, a once thriving haven that had fallen into disrepair. His heart pounded as he realized that this lead might not only unravel the mystery of the girl's past but also expose a hidden underbelly of neglect and exploitation in the community. A breakthrough came when a long-retired officer recalled a peculiar case from decades past, a story of a secret refuge for children who had slipped through the cracks, a sanctuary where they were kept hidden away from a harsh world. Though the case had long since faded into obscurity, the details were strikingly similar to the current events: an orphan child, cryptic messages, and a lingering sense of foreboding. This revelation fueled a renewed urgency in the investigation. Daniels and his team realized that the warning in the girl's 2 words, now echoed by the anonymous radio message, might be a desperate attempt by someone on the inside to expose a danger that had been allowed to fester in the shadows. As the pieces began to align, the precinct buzzed with both determination and anxiety. Every officer felt the weight of history, as if the ghosts of past secrets were whispering that the time for reckoning had come. The anonymous lead was a double-edged sword, both a promise of answers and a harbinger of deeper risks. In that moment, every second counted, every clue was vital, and every shadow held the possibility of salvation or doom. Daniels closed his eyes briefly, steadying his resolve. With the cryptic message guiding them and the silent girl's fate hanging in the balance, the team prepared to follow the trail. They knew that beyond the immediate threat lay a labyrinth of secrets that could forever alter their understanding of justice and compassion. The night was far from over, and as the search for "where the lost find solace" began in earnest, every officer braced for the revelation that would either bring salvation or unravel them all. The officers, armed with the cryptic message and renewed determination, set out at dawn to follow the lead. The address scrawled on a tattered map and hinted at in old records pointed to an abandoned community center on the outskirts of town. Once a lively haven for the underprivileged, the building now stood silent and imposing, its boarded-up windows and overgrown entrance lending it an air of neglect, and of secrets best left undisturbed. Officer Daniels led the small team through a narrow, winding road. The morning light was weak, casting long shadows that seemed to dance around them. Every step felt heavy, as if the past itself was watching. The team's radios remained on low static, the hum of anticipation in every wordless moment. They remembered the child's 2 words and the eerie radio tip. Those 2 simple words, uttered with a calm yet desperate clarity, were echoing in their minds now. Had they been a call for help? A warning? Or something far more calculated? As they approached the community center, the first sign of resistance emerged, a tall, gaunt figure standing at the side of a rusted chain-link fence. The stranger's eyes, dark and watchful, followed the officers as they halted a few yards away from the entrance. In a gravelly voice barely audible above the whisper of the wind, the figure said, "You shouldn't be here." His words sent a ripple of unease through the team, as if his very presence was a portent of trouble. Daniels stepped forward, his tone firm yet measured. "We're here on official business. We received a tip that this is where the lost find solace. We need to see what's inside." The stranger hesitated, his gaze shifting to the dilapidated building before him. "Sometimes, what you find inside isn't what you're meant to see," he murmured, almost to himself. Before the officers could press further, a clatter from within the building startled them. The heavy front door, long chained and padlocked, shuddered as if disturbed by an unseen force. It swung open slowly, revealing a narrow corridor lit by the early morning sun filtering through broken glass. Daniel's hand instinctively moved toward his radio, but he paused, an inexplicable mix of dread and curiosity gripping him. The 2 words the child had uttered now seemed to pulse with a deeper meaning, urging them onward. With a silent nod to one another, the team advanced. Inside, the corridor was lined with peeling wallpaper and faded murals of smiling faces, a stark contrast to the grim reality of decay. The air was thick with dust and a faint, bitter scent of neglect. As they walked, every sound echoed, magnifying the tension in the silence. The building seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Halfway down the corridor, they encountered a heavy door marked with strange symbols that mirrored the intricate carvings on the wooden charm found in the girl's jacket. Daniels paused before pushing it open, his gloved hand trembling slightly. Inside, a room unfolded like a snapshot from a long-forgotten time. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor, and remnants of children's drawings were pinned haphazardly to the walls. It was as if the room itself was a memorial, a final resting place for dreams abandoned too soon. Then came the twist. In the far corner of the room, illuminated by a single shaft of light, lay a meticulously arranged set of objects, a battered diary, a faded photograph of a smiling child, and, most startling of all, a handwritten note. The note, in neat cursive, read, "Sometimes, the lost must be found to save the future." The words resonated deeply with the team, connecting the girl's silent two-word message to a legacy of hidden truths and untold stories. Daniels exchanged a look with his colleagues, the weight of the revelation settling in. This wasn't merely a derelict shelter, it was a repository of secrets, a chronicle of forgotten lives that had been marked by neglect and exploitation. Before they could examine further, a sudden noise from behind startled them. The door slammed shut, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. In that instant, a low rumble vibrated through the floorboards. The building was not entirely abandoned, it was as if it had been waiting for this moment to awaken. The once muted voices of the past seemed to whisper warnings through the walls. Officer Reynolds, ever the vigilant one, caught sight of a hidden panel in the wall slightly ajar, revealing a narrow passageway. With hesitant resolve, Daniels signaled the team. They approached the panel, and as they pried it open, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the corridor. The gaunt stranger from outside reappeared at the entrance, his expression now one of urgent alarm. "You must leave, now," he cried, his eyes wide with fear. His sudden outburst added to the confusion and tension. It was as if every piece of evidence, every whispered clue, had led to a convergence of hidden forces. Caught between the urge to unearth the truth and the palpable threat looming in every shadow, the officers faced a critical decision. The two words, uttered by a frightened orphan, had set this chain of events in motion, transforming an ordinary investigation into a quest for answers that could upend everything they believed about their community. With the gaunt stranger's warning echoing in their ears and the mysterious note pointing to a deeper purpose, the team realized that they were standing on the precipice of something far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. In that tense moment, as the building seemed to come alive with the secrets of its past, the officers braced themselves for what lay ahead, a confrontation with a hidden network of power, a revelation that would forever alter their understanding of duty, and a twist that would force them to question who, or what, was really in control. Deep within the hidden passage behind the mysterious panel, the officers discovered a small storage area left undisturbed for decades. Dust motes danced in the narrow shafts of light as Officer Daniels, accompanied by Officer Reynolds and a forensic specialist, began methodically sifting through a collection of old boxes and drawers. Inside one battered wooden chest lay a trove of yellowed documents, faded photographs, and handwritten letters that, at first glance, appeared to be relics of a forgotten past. Yet, as they carefully unfolded each brittle sheet, the true weight of what they had uncovered began to emerge. Among the scattered papers, a sealed envelope caught Daniel's eye. He broke the fragile seal to reveal an official report dated over 30 years ago, detailing a series of unexplained disappearances from a now-defunct orphanage. The report mentioned several children, their names and faces lost to time, all of whom had vanished under mysterious circumstances. One document, in particular, contained a handwritten note that read, "Marked by fire, destined for a cause beyond our reckoning." Daniel's heart pounded as he realized that the description matched the peculiar burn mark on the little girl's wrist. In the faded photographs, a small girl with sorrowful eyes and a telltale mark on her wrist stared back at them, a reflection of the child in their custody. The similarity was undeniable. Officer Reynolds, flipping through an old diary that had been tucked away in one of the drawers, discovered entries that spoke in hushed tones of a clandestine organization. The diary recounted how influential figures in the community, under the guise of benevolence, had covertly orchestrated the systematic removal of vulnerable children from society. These children were branded with a peculiar burn mark, a ritualistic symbol that signified their unspoken bond to this shadowy network. The revelation hit the team with a mix of horror and resolve. This was no random act of cruelty. The burn mark was a deliberate, almost ceremonial branding, a mark of possession and control. The quiet girl's 2 words, uttered with such quiet urgency, now took on a new, darker significance. They were not merely a frightened cry in the dark, they were a coded plea meant to alert the officers to a danger that had been lurking beneath the surface of their community for decades. At that critical moment, the gaunt stranger from the community center reappeared at the threshold of the storage room. His presence, once a harbinger of warning, now carried the gravity of confession. In a low, trembling voice, he revealed that he had once been a caretaker at the very orphanage chronicled in these documents. He spoke of nights filled with terror, when influential community leaders would convene behind closed doors, deciding the fates of children like marbles in a game. He described how the burn marks were not accidents but symbols, a sinister signature left on those chosen to serve a hidden purpose. As he recounted his painful memories, the stranger's eyes glistened with remorse. He explained that the organization had exploited these children, turning their innocence into a currency for power and influence. The girl, he said, was one of the few who had managed to escape that cruel destiny. Her silence, her pained expression, and even the 2 words she had spoken were all part of a desperate message, a warning to the world that the cycle of exploitation might be broken if the truth were finally uncovered. Officer Daniels listened intently, each word deepening the sense of urgency that had gripped the room. The evidence before them painted a grim picture of betrayal, a network of corruption that had quietly operated in the shadows, preying on the most vulnerable. It became increasingly clear that the orphan girl was not merely a lost child, she was a survivor of a dark legacy, a living testament to an injustice that had spanned generations. The officers now faced the daunting task of connecting these long-forgotten truths to the present danger. The girl's 2-word message, once an enigma, was now understood as a signal, a final plea to protect not only herself but also the countless others who had been ensnared by the organization's web. Her burn mark, the secret documents, and the gaunt stranger's confession formed a tapestry of evidence that pointed toward a deliberate plan of exploitation and control. In that quiet, musty room, as the officers gathered around the fragile documents and the haunting photographs, a collective determination took hold. They knew that exposing this hidden network would not only secure the safety of the child before them but also bring long-overdue justice to the many who had suffered in silence. Danielle's steady voice broke the silence, "We must take this evidence to light. This isn't just about one girl, it's about ending a legacy of abuse." With that declaration, the weight of the past and the promise of a better future converged. The officers left the hidden archive with more than just evidence. They carried with them a solemn vow to unravel the tangled web of betrayal and to protect the innocent from being silenced by a corrupt legacy. In the quiet determination of that moment, the girl's secret, once shrouded in mystery, became a beacon of hope for change and redemption. Dawn crept over the horizon with a deceptive calm, but within the precinct, tension was a tangible force. The officers, now armed with irrefutable evidence of a decades-old conspiracy, braced themselves for what lay ahead. Officer Daniel's steady eyes betrayed a storm of emotions as he gathered his team in the briefing room. Their faces were etched with resolve and apprehension alike. They knew that exposing the shadowy network would pit them against powers that had long thrived in secrecy. Barely had the first light of morning broken when a series of coded messages began flooding the radios. Each message was brief yet ominous, a stark warning that the organization was mobilizing its forces. One such message, delivered in a low, measured tone, declared, "The past must remain buried. Cease your inquiry or face the consequences." Its words, as chilling as a death knell, resonated in every officer's mind, underscoring the imminent danger they now faced. Outside the station, a convoy of unmarked vehicles rolled quietly along the main road. Their darkened windows and silent engines spoke of a deliberate approach, a covert operation in progress. The officers realized that the very network they were about to dismantle was no longer confined to dusty records and hidden passages, it was now reaching out, intent on silencing them permanently. Daniels, gripping his radio, issued a terse command: "Lock down all exits and prepare for immediate deployment. We are no longer just investigators, we are guardians of a truth that some would kill to keep hidden." In the secure holding room where the little girl had been sheltered, her wide, wary eyes reflected both fear and an inexplicable strength. Though small in stature, she had become the epicenter of an investigation that threatened to shake the community to its core. Her silence had spoken volumes earlier, and now, in the face of mounting danger, her very presence was a beacon that compelled the officers to push forward despite the risks. The gaunt stranger, whose confession had unraveled so many dark secrets, returned to the precinct with a haunted urgency. His voice trembled as he recounted the final details of his past. "They are coming. The ones who orchestrated everything, they will not let this truth see the light of day. I tried to warn you, but they have eyes everywhere." His words, laced with remorse and fear, confirmed what the officers had long suspected: the conspiracy extended far beyond a single orphanage, seeping into the highest echelons of local power. Acting on his tip, Daniels organized a swift move to secure the abandoned community center where the secret archives had been hidden. He suspected that this building, once a haven for the lost and exploited, was also a focal point for the organization's clandestine activities. As the team advanced toward the center, the early morning air grew heavy with foreboding. Every step echoed as if the ground itself were warning them of the peril that lay ahead. Upon reaching the center, they found the building shrouded in an eerie silence, its broken windows and sagging doors hinting at secrets best kept hidden. Yet the calm exterior belied the storm within. In a shadowed corridor, an indistinct figure darted between piles of old furniture and debris. Daniels's heart pounded as he signaled his team to proceed with caution. The officers fanned out, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, each beam searching for any sign of movement, a sign that the enemy had arrived. Then, without warning, the building's silence shattered. A door slammed open, and a volley of shouts filled the air. The team found themselves in a tense standoff with a group of masked individuals, their eyes cold and resolute behind darkened visors. The masked leader, his voice muffled yet forceful, barked, "You have meddled in affairs beyond your understanding. Step away now, or we will do what is necessary." The threat was unmistakable: these were not mere criminals, but operatives of a far more dangerous and deeply rooted organization. In that critical moment, the stakes could not have been higher. The girl, though silent and seemingly fragile, had become the linchpin of an investigation that now teetered on the edge of a violent showdown. It was clear that the organization saw her not as a victim but as a symbol, a living reminder of a dark legacy they desperately wanted to keep hidden. Her very survival was intertwined with the exposure of the conspiracy, and the enemy would stop at nothing to erase that possibility. Daniels's voice cut through the rising chaos: "We're not stepping back. We have evidence that must be seen and heard. You have no right to silence the truth." His words, steady and resolute, carried the weight of every life that had suffered under the organization's covert tyranny. The officers, emboldened by his command, moved with a determined unity, preparing for the worst while clinging to the hope that justice would prevail. In that frozen moment of confrontation, time itself seemed to hang in the balance. The air crackled with tension, the threat of violence palpable with every breath. The final showdown had arrived, and with it came the realization that the truth, once unearthed, would irreversibly change the course of their lives and the fate of the many who had been silenced for far too long. The confrontation was not just about stopping an impending attack, it was about reclaiming the dignity and hope of those who had been lost in the shadows. Every officer knew that the coming minutes would determine more than the outcome of this standoff. They would decide whether a legacy of exploitation would be finally confronted by the light of truth, or whether the darkness would once again triumph over the vulnerable. The final threat had been made, and with courage and resolve, the team stood ready to meet it head-on. In the heart of the abandoned community center, the tense standoff reached its boiling point. For a long, breathless moment, silence reigned as both sides sized each other up in the dim light of a fractured dawn. Then, with a sudden shift in the atmosphere, Officer Daniels gave a curt nod, and his team moved decisively. Their objective was clear: secure the building, neutralize the threat, and protect the child whose fate had become intertwined with an insidious past. The masked operatives, momentarily taken aback by the steely resolve of the officers, hesitated. It was in that critical pause that backup from a specialized task force, alerted earlier by Daniels's call, burst into the corridor. The sudden arrival of additional law enforcement disrupted the attackers' carefully laid plans. In the ensuing chaos, the masked figures scattered, their shouts echoing off the crumbling walls as they attempted a hasty retreat through the labyrinthine halls of the center. Officer Reynolds led a small squad into the winding corridors, their flashlights cutting swaths through the darkness. Every step was measured and cautious, each officer acutely aware that danger still lurked in the shadows. The gaunt stranger, whose confession had provided the key to this entire investigation, lingered behind as Daniels ensured the safety of the child. His eyes, filled with remorse and quiet determination, followed the unfolding scene as if silently pleading for redemption. Outside, the task force secured the perimeter. The convoy of unmarked vehicles, which had earlier signified a hidden threat from beyond, was now commandeered by federal agents. With clear orders and unyielding resolve, they began the process of rounding up the fleeing operatives. The confrontation had escalated into a full-blown pursuit. Officers chased the masked figures through a series of decrepit rooms and winding hallways, every footstep echoing the long-buried secrets of the place. Back inside the main hall, Daniels carefully guided the child into a secure room. Her eyes, wide with a blend of fear and something akin to resigned bravery, met his. In that fleeting moment, Daniels realized that her silent plea, the two words that had set this entire chain of events in motion, had served as both a warning and a catalyst for change. The girl's safety became the priority above all else, and he vowed silently to ensure that no harm would come to her while justice was served. The standoff reached a crescendo when one of the masked operatives, cornered in a long-forgotten storage room, attempted to barricade himself behind rusted shelves. With the sound of determined footsteps drawing nearer, the task force negotiated a tense moment of surrender. A frail, almost defeated voice emerged from behind the barricade as the officer in charge assured him that there was no further need for resistance. One by one, the masked figures began to lower their weapons. In a flurry of handcuffs, recorded statements, and the methodical securing of evidence, the immediate threat was finally neutralized. As the adrenaline slowly ebbed away, the officers regrouped in the main hall of the community center. The building, which had once concealed dark secrets and hidden atrocities, now bore witness to a turning point. Dust hung in the shafts of early morning light, and the eerie quiet was punctuated only by the low murmur of voices discussing the next steps. In that moment, relief was palpable, a shared, unspoken exhale that resonated through every tired but resolute face in the room. Daniels took a moment to survey the scene. His gaze shifted from the secured operatives to the stacks of recovered documents and the remnants of the dark past they represented. In the chaos of confrontation, the evidence gathered over decades, the reports, the photographs, and the handwritten testimonies, had finally been brought to light. Each piece told a story of exploitation and suffering, but also of courage and the relentless pursuit of truth. Outside the community center, a gentle rain began to fall, washing away the grime of neglect and the residue of conflict. The officers, now joined by federal agents and investigative journalists, knew that the revelations from this operation would send shockwaves through the community. The once hidden network, long shielded by silence and fear, was now exposed for all to see. The rescue of the orphan girl had not only averted an imminent threat but had also sparked the dismantling of an organization that had thrived on secrecy and abuse. In the days that followed, the community center became a hub of activity, a place where victims of past injustices came forward, bolstered by the courage of those who had risked everything to protect the innocent. The girl, now in the care of a dedicated social services unit, was provided with the support she so desperately needed. Her silent plea, encapsulated in those two fateful words, had catalyzed an operation that reached far beyond the walls of a dilapidated building. As the operation wound down, the officers gathered outside the now secured building. There was an air of solemn triumph mixed with the bittersweet acknowledgement of what had been uncovered. They had faced down a formidable enemy and emerged victorious, yet the scars of the past lingered like shadows in the early morning light. In that quiet, reflective moment, the team understood that while the immediate threat had been subdued, the journey toward healing and justice was only just beginning. The resolution was not just in the arrest of those responsible, it was in the realization that even the smallest voice, the quietest plea, could ignite a beacon of hope and instigate lasting change. In the weeks that followed the tumultuous confrontation, the community began a slow, healing transformation. The once forgotten community center, now stripped bare of its dark secrets, became a symbol of reclamation rather than decay. Under the steady guidance of Officer Daniels and his team, the recovered evidence was meticulously documented and handed over to a task force dedicated to exposing the long-hidden network. The arrests that ensued sent shockwaves through local power structures, dismantling a system that had thrived on silence and exploitation for decades. Within the precinct, the officers gathered for one of those rare, reflective moments after the storm. Their faces, etched with fatigue and quiet resolve, bore testimony to the weight of the past they had uncovered. In the stillness of the briefing room, Officer Daniels reviewed the case file once more, a collection of faded photographs, handwritten diaries, and the poignant relics of lost childhoods. His eyes lingered on the evidence that had come from one small, silent voice. That orphan girl, whose simple 2 words had set in motion a cascade of events, had unwittingly reminded them of the immense power hidden in even the quietest plea for help. The girl's recovery had become a catalyst for community reform. Social services stepped in to nurture not only her recovery but also the lives of others who had long been left in the shadows. The center was transformed into a shelter and a community hub, a place where the lost could find solace and the broken could begin to rebuild. Volunteers, many of whom were seasoned members of the community with their own scars of hardship, came forward to support the rebuilding efforts. Their involvement, fueled by a deep sense of justice and compassion, imbued the project with a purpose that transcended the immediate crisis. In the aftermath, as the community began to heal, the officers found time to reflect on the broader meaning of their struggle. They remembered the moments of palpable terror during the standoff, the murmur of conspiracies whispered in dark corridors, and the heart-wrenching silence of a child burdened by secrets too heavy for her young shoulders. These recollections were not just memories of a case solved. They were lessons etched into the fabric of their lives. Officer Daniels, in particular, found himself often recalling that quiet voice and the courage it had inspired. In a conversation with a veteran colleague one rainy afternoon, he mused, "We're all shaped by the truths we uncover. Even a whisper, when heard with enough care, can change the course of many lives." His words resonated deeply with the older officers who had seen the rise and fall of many systems, who had witnessed the relentless march of time and the inevitability of change. They knew that every small act of bravery contributed to the greater good, a truth that had been reaffirmed by the unfolding of this case. In community meetings held in renovated halls and local gathering spots, discussions grew around the importance of protecting the vulnerable. The tragic legacy of the orphanage, the burn marks that had once symbolized a cruel claim of ownership, were now transformed into a rallying cry for better oversight and compassion. Leaders and citizens alike began advocating for reforms that would ensure no child or disenfranchised soul would ever be subjected to such hidden abuse again. In this way, the dark chapters of the past were slowly rewritten into a narrative of hope and redemption. As time wore on, the investigation's impact rippled far beyond the precinct's walls. Families who had once suffered in silence found their voices, empowered by the knowledge that truth, no matter how deeply buried, would eventually see the light. The courageous stand of the officers had reminded everyone that no matter how formidable the forces of corruption, the resilience of community spirit and the resolve to seek justice were always stronger. The transformation that began in that dilapidated community center extended into everyday life. People learned that silence, too often a shield for wrongdoing, could be broken by even the most vulnerable among them. The life lesson that emerged was clear: every individual, regardless of age or circumstance, holds the potential to ignite change. In standing up for what is right, even in the face of overwhelming darkness, one small act of courage can transform despair into hope, and indifference into action. In the gentle twilight of a newly restored community hall, where the laughter of children mixed with the reflective conversations of older citizens, the legacy of that lost girl's 2 words was finally understood. It was a lesson for everyone, that no matter how long one has suffered, redemption and renewal are always within reach when compassion leads the way. This truth, simple, enduring, and life-affirming, reminded the community that even in our darkest moments, the power to change the future lies within each of us.